Well, good afternoon, those of you on the East Coast and on the West Coast. A big good morning to everyone and happy holidays. This is Lisa with Phone Pro, and welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar is about empathy. And you can see we're going to jump right in with empathy is important. How important is it is actually the question. So we want to start at this place with empathy because when we think about, are we being empathetic? One of the things for us to stop and think about is this, is do I even feel it's important enough to put energy and effort into? That's the challenge. And so let's examine that a little bit. How important is empathy? So we've got a couple of facts here to share with you. So first off, Daniel Goleman, which many of us know, emotional intelligence. So Daniel Goleman, and I'll just read this, and other workplace competency researchers have consistently identified empathy as a core component of emotional intelligence and a powerful predictor of success. In many professions, empathy helps us develop deep levels of rapport and trust. So let's look at those two words. How often in our businesses have we said to each other, we need to make sure that we're really building rapport with customers and rapport in relationships with our employees and make sure that trust and confidence is there. And so right here, over and over again, consistently identify empathy as a core component of being able to have that rapport and that trust. So right there, absolutely, it's important. Now, let's continue our journey, though, and find out a little bit more about it being important. So next it says, results reveal that empathy is positively related to job performance. This is so interesting. I'll tell you the research about this. Let me finish reading it. It says, the study conducted that managers show more empathy toward direct reports are viewed as better performers in their job by their bosses. So let me tell you, Center for Creative Leadership, many of us are familiar with that. What they did was a study. And what they did is they asked some direct reports. They said, so tell us about your boss. And they asked some very specific questions. Questions such as, do they convey compassion? Are they willing to help? Are they interested in your needs? Those are the type of questions that they asked the direct reports. And then they went and asked the bosses of these leaders. And they asked things such as, how would you rate their performance? How would you compare them with other leaders? And they also asked, so if you project in 5 years, would that leader still be with you or would they be burned out? And what they found were these results, is that those leaders that were showing more empathy, that the direct reports were showing as, yes, there's compassion, yes, they're willing to help, those were seen by their bosses as better performers. So doing better with all the technical stuff too. So it's just this amazing correlation that empathy has regarding connection and helping people be their best. Just unbelievable. Such a great report. All right, so let's examine our next one. The next one says, physical, materialistic influences that dominated culture in the 20th century ebb, while metaphysical, those experiential influences become stronger. Ultimately, everything is personal. Ultimately, everything is personal. So take a look. This is talking, it's a book, Firms of Endearment is where this comes from. There are a couple of additions to this. Now, this one I find really interesting. Firms of endearment have something that's called humanistic performance, all right? Humanistic performance. And what they're talking about is this, is that what in the environment, do these qualities exist in the work environment? And first off, let me explain a little bit about work environment. So when I say the word stakeholder to you, one of the things that in companies that have this endearment type of environment, when they hear stakeholders, they don't just think about shareholders. They think about employees, they think about customers, they think about the full bucket of people that are involved in the organization, all right? So that's huge. So humanistic performance is what the firms of endearment are talking about. Now, the environment itself, it purposely has things like joy in it, authenticity, empathy was also mentioned. So these are companies that they think about, how do we make this an actual part of our environment, from benefits to the way that we interact with people. Now, here's something interesting, because then the question then becomes, well, does that make a difference? Does that make a difference to success? Does that make a difference to the big picture? And the answer is simply yes. So what the studies show in this research is that these companies, things such as Costco and CarMax and BMW and there are a couple others here, Caterpillar, New Balance, they are these firms of endearment. And what they did is they compared them to some companies in the research that the Jim Collins group did with Good to Great. And many of you have heard of Good to Great. And so what they see is that they see outstanding performance, even better than in Good to Great. So just really interesting. So again, ultimately, everything is personal. There's this personal, again, it's humanistic performance that the firms of endearment. I highly encourage you to take a peek at both editions of that information. And then the last one, it says the most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. And this comes from Chip Connolly. Chip Connolly has a couple of books out, and he has an amazing story with Joie de Vivre is his hospitality industry. It's his hotel. It's out in California. It has a very, very interesting story. And one of his books is called Peak, and it's all about how we get our mojo from Maslow, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then another book, and I find this so incredibly interesting, it's about emotional equations. So he looks at emotions within business, within success, and he says, well, what makes up those emotions? So empathy is an emotion. And so one of the things that makes up that emotion is others. And that our radar is even turned on for the existence of others. And then, of course, that feeds empathy. So all of these things are talking about how important empathy is. And we know it's important, but these are helping to qualify how important. So let's jump into a little bit, and let me go ahead and get to the next slide here. What is empathy? So when it comes to what is empathy, stop and think about one of the most common definitions is walking in someone else's shoes, seeing from someone else's eyes. All right, so, and we all agree that huge, great definition for empathy. So the question actually is, do we really do that with every single customer, every single employee? Do we stop and actually think about what's going on in their life, what's happening in the episode within that interaction that I'm having with them? So there is something that's enormously powerful, and this comes from the medical industry. And some of you may have seen a video from the Cleveland Clinic, and it shows you people maneuvering through a hospital, and then it just shows you what they're thinking, which helps us to see what's actually going on in their lives. So if I'm interacting with them, I want to make sure that I think about that fuller picture that makes them them. And the video starts with this particular statement from Henry David Thoreau. Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? So I have some pictures to show you to help illustrate what I'm talking about in this video. And this video was used, I've seen it in pharma companies, and I've seen it a couple different places, and it's used to help us be more in touch with being empathetic and to actually see things through other people's eyes. So let me show you some of the examples that they come up with. So for example, they show a gentleman in an elevator in the hospital, and look and see what it says beside him. His wife had a stroke, and he's worried how he's going to take care of her. So when you stop to think about it, what is it that I can do in that moment when I walk on that elevator and I see him over there? And maybe I'm thinking about what's going on in my life and why I'm there. And then I see him, and just the simple act of smiling. And then that, smile is one of those things that's most often reciprocated, and it releases endorphins in you, which helps you feel a bit better, which gives you strength. That's an empathetic thing to do. And, that just gives them a little bit of strength, hope, encouragement, just even with a simple smile. Another one that they have in the video, you can see this is it's a couple of people on an escalator. The first one says tumor was benign. And then if this were actually the video playing, what you would see with the guy that's in the blue shirt, his thought is tumor was malignant. And yet you see them, and they both from the outside just look the same. And if they come up and they ask you a question, it's like, well, what's going on behind the scenes? So let me continue with a couple more examples. This one, a gentleman who's learning to walk again from a tragedy that he had, and he says he's worried about how he's going to pay for all of this. And then another one, a father that's just gazing out the window and says his daughter's getting married on Saturday, and he's determined to be there. And then this last one that says is a woman who says she's always wanted children of her own. And what you see in the video is that she's down playing with a child who's in a wheelchair, and the child's face is just lit up. And she's just is like, I've always wanted to have children of my own. So empathy is about recognizing what's going on in people's lives so we can help them be receptive and cooperative with us, that we aren't just going about things in just a very bland, routine way. Now, there's a story that I heard, and this was when I was out in Seattle, Washington. Someone shared this with me, and she said that she and her 2 young children had gone into a McDonald's restaurant, and her children are grade school age, and so they went up to the counter, they ordered the food, they got the food, and she turned around, to walk to the table, and all of a sudden she went, oh, I want to get some water, and so she turned back around to the person who was helping her with her order, and she said, oh, may I please get a cup for water? And so the worker gave her a cup. It was one of those small cups for water, and she goes, oh, could I please get a larger cup? And he said this to her. He said, well, it's our policy just to give these for water. And so she said, I really could use a larger cup. And he stayed with his policy statement, and she said she blew up. She blew up. And he had no idea that she and her children had just come from the doctor. And there are some challenges that are in her life, and that's what was weighing on her mind. And so at that point, luckily, a manager came over and handed her the largest cup they have and just gave her a smile. And she said it made all the difference in the world to her. So if we stop to think about what else is going on in other people's life, does it help us to be empathetic? And the video actually ends with this question: would you treat them differently? If you knew all the things that they were thinking about, would you treat them differently? And we always want to say, well, yes. So it's getting ourselves to think about that, to think about what's going on, even though I may have heard on every single phone call today that they can't pay their bill, or maybe every single employee that I've seen is giving me problems and no solutions. And so it's something that's like, okay, how do I actually connect? Because empathy is about connection, There is a researcher, Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown, great one to look up, and she has a TED Talk. Many of you, if you've seen me before, you know how much I just love TED Talks. So TED.com, and just put in empathy. Brene Brown will come up, Dr. Brene Brown. And she said that empathy is about connection, and it drives connection. And that's what we want. That's what we want. When someone is calling up and they're saying, I can't pay my bill, and they're upset. Well, what's between the lines? What's the feeling that's attached to that? Are they feeling, I can't provide for my family? What are they feeling? And so what can we say to help connect with them rather than be defensive with them? So let's continue our journey with some things. So here's the good news. Empathy can be learned. And there are many of us that are empathetic, just naturally. It's one of those great things. There are people walking around that just really, really get it, and they recognize it, and they know how to help people connect with them. It's wonderful. And then there are other people like, and I'll tell you myself, when I'm on autopilot, it is hard for me to recognize that empathy is important to give in the moment. My autopilot isn't naturally empathetic. It's just the way that I'm wired. So it's something that it takes extra energy and effort from me in order to be empathetic, and that's fine because I know that about myself. Here is something that many of you may know, this little guy. His name is Topo Gigio, and you can see at the top there, this is from the Ed Sullivan Show. And something to always keep in mind to help us regarding how we're wired, and if it's one of those things that some people empathy comes very naturally for, and other people they have to work harder at it. We want to be forgiving of those things and help people work through that, because Topo Gigio said this, and it completely relates to what we're talking about. He said, whenever Ed Sullivan would bring something up about, oh, this will be great, he goes, oh, it's easy for you, but it's hard for me. And we want to recognize that just expressing empathy may be hard for people. Now, keep in mind, we're all capable, and it can be learned, which is fantastic. That's the great, great news. So let's dive a little bit deeper in this. All right. Now, let's take a look at some roadblocks to empathy. And then also, well, with these roadblocks, what do we do so we can express empathy? And also, I want to let everyone know that all these slides are going to be coming out to you after and also a recording of the webinar after we're finished here. So, feel free to take notes, and then also you will have these slides. We will send those to you. So, what's our first roadblock? Our first roadblock, and boy, with so much research around empathy that we've done, this pops up all the time. I'm just not paying attention. I either lack the motivation, maybe it's because I'm wired not to give empathy, so I don't get the relevance of it enough to do it consistently. Stop and think about what we just saw about the people on the elevator and all of that. That just, wow, the things that people are going through. Or I'm distracted by my own thoughts. I'm thinking about maybe the meeting I just came from, or maybe the call I was just on, or the customer I was just working with. And so I'm missing cues about how it's important for me to express empathy with this one customer so they're receptive with me. Also, it talks about multitasking. Because multitasking, remember, is one of those things that we're not literally doing two things at once efficiently. We're actually going back and forth between those two things. And we're doing both of those. The effectiveness is lowered. So not paying attention is a huge thing. And we don't mean not to pay attention. We sound distracted, and we're disconnected, and we're missing cues. So what do we do? So how do we express empathy? So listening to meaning. And when we talk about listening for meaning, so if you're face-to-face with someone, jump in the chat box right now and just put in, what is it, if you're really listening, you will capture, so you'll know how to empathize with someone. What are some things that you actually will hear when you're really listening? Yes, tone, feelings, exactly. Oh, perfect. Yes. Exactly. Tone, especially when you're on the phone, it's up to 82% of the success of your call is in how you sound. It's absolutely, yes, body language is huge. Shannon and Kelly, when you're talking face to face, body language wins. That's the huge thing. So if I'm only concerned with what they're saying, the facts, I'm missing all these cues. I'm only listening to 7% of their message. 93% of their message is coming through their tone and through their body language. So think about face-to-face, phone, all of that matters. Absolutely. Asking them to share, asking them to talk more. Fantastic. So really digging in. So underneath listening for meaning, it says, resist the assumptions. So the assumptions that their story is the same as every other story. You really want to listen to how they're sounding, even when they pause. Some people can get so emotional that it's hard for them to actually continue talking. Be sharply attentive. So there's a TV. There's a picture of a TV there, and it's there for a reason. So to help practice listening, but before I talk about the TV, let me talk just a pinch more about the how important it is to invest in truly listening, and we know how it feels when you're truly listened to. Interesting research. There's some research about physicians. All right, so physicians in hospitals, physicians that are in their own practices, and what it showed was this, is that, and this is in the U.S., it's a study in the U.S., that physicians that come across as not being empathetic are sued more often. Isn't that wild? So physicians that are coming across as not being empathetic are sued more often. And so when physicians actually interrupt them, and when they don't ask them questions, like you were talking about over here, Nibby, about, what's your story, and ask how they're feeling, and maybe even just being jovial just a little bit if the situation is good with that. Those type of things, if they avoid those things, it's amazing research, the horrible repercussions for themselves. Now also, so the research continued on, and I thought this was really amazing, is that they said, so how long does it take for a physician to listen, like in an interaction? How much time has passed for them to actually be perceived as being empathetic, to really show that they're being empathetic? And so how long? 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes. So it's just amazing information regarding listening. So now let me get back to the TV. So to help practice your listening and to tune into things that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to when you're watching TV, and just not anything like Transformers or something where there's always action going on, but where there's interaction with people. Keep the TV on and turn the volume down, and then just watch what's going on, and just define what you think that they're feeling just by watching them. And look at the other people that are interacting on that TV show too. And then do the exact opposite. Turn the volume back up and then turn around and don't look. And so, especially if you're on the phone a lot, just pick up on things that they're saying. So the TV has multiple uses. So that's one thing to help you really pay attention. Really pay attention. All right, next one. Emotions. Oh, boy. We all have emotions, some of it at higher levels, some of it at lower levels. So what are your emotions? Because that can act as a barrier to you being empathetic. So let's take a look at this. Take an emotional temperature check. So do you have a short fuse? Do you have a neutral zone where you're just saying okay a lot? And yes, and you sound neutral, which is, of course, meaning I don't care. I'm just indifferent. And I'll talk about mirror neurons in just as, well, actually, great information that's come from the field of brain, looking at the brain and everything, that we mimic emotions coming at us. Now that could be great news when we are trying to control some emotions coming at us, and also that also can be challenging news if I'm a person that typically has a short fuse and someone comes up to me is very defensive. Well, I want to mimic that, and so it really takes effort for me not to, and to really be more empathetic, because then they'll start mirroring that. So the mirror neurons are real, and they're just a part of the way that our brain operates. So when it comes to Viktor Frankl is someone that I highly encourage you. He's highly inspirational. Viktor Frankl is his name again, and he is a gentleman that survived the Holocaust. And hopefully some of you have actually heard about him. He also, there's some stuff on TED Talks with him, so look him up. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing him up is because of this. When there's a stimulus, so an employee comes up to me and they're angry. So that's the stimulus. And what Viktor Frankl says, between the stimulus and my reaction, there's space where I have the choice on how my reaction will happen. So there's this space. It's not together. There's always this space. I have a choice. I have a choice. He's highly inspirational. So take an emotional temperature check and see how your emotions are in the moment, and also over time. How are you wired? What's your emotional autopilot? So be aware of that, and then being able to have more of a grasp on that helps you with expressing empathy more. All right, next one. Our definition of empathy, is it off? Now this is something, stay with me on this, because this is something that is very interesting. So does empathy mean I'm agreeing with someone? Does empathy mean that it's sympathy? Is it the same thing? Is just saying I'm sorry, is that empathetic enough? All right, let's examine this a little bit more. So empathy is about the other person. It's expressing appropriate care and concern for that other person. We want to make sure that we're acknowledging and not passing judgment. Because remember, we want them receptive, we want them connected to us. So when we talk about things such as this, if I say something such as, I'm so sorry for your loss, that's about me. When I say, I am so sorry. So how do I make a statement that's more for them? And a lot of the times we'll hear things like, I'm so sorry to hear that. Well, all of that is about me. How do we turn that into more about them? And so let me give you a couple of examples here. So remember, empathy is about them, and it creates connection. Remember what we talked about with Dr. Brene Brown? She actually says that sympathy is more of a disconnection. So in sympathy is how you're feeling about it. And you want to actually, empathy is really how they are feeling about it. So let me bring a few examples up here. So the first one says, oh my, how frustrating for you. So it's completely addressing their feelings. The next one is, you must be concerned about, and then whatever that might be, how to get those lights back on, or how to cook dinner tonight. And then the next one says, what's happened to you is unacceptable. So that's an empathetic statement. It's about them, and it's understandable that you're upset about this. So those are empathetic statements. Now let's look a little bit deeper into some situations. So I'm going to turn the page for us. So which of these statements express empathy? Now here's the answer. The answer is either all or none. All right, so those are your two choices. And you can see that for A, B, C, and D, you have what the customer says in parentheses, and then you have whatever the representative responds to in quotations. So I can't pay this bill. I completely understand how you feel. All right, is that empathy? My electricity is off. At least you still have water. Is that empathy? C, do you know how long I've been on hold? No, how long? Is that empathy? I'm upset that I can't get any answers. I'm sorry. So jump into the chat box and write either the word none or all. Do you feel that these are expressing empathy? Marvelous. Very good. Very good. You're correct. You're absolutely correct. One of them is pure sarcasm. C, oh my goodness. Do you know how long I've been on hold? That's just pure sarcasm. No, how long? Oh, just it's amazing. And D, I'm sorry. It's an attempt at empathy. It's about me though. So let's play around with these and let's take a look here. So, and I see what you're saying, Beverly. So I can't pay this bill. I completely understand how you feel. So that's about me. And there are a couple of words in A that will trip us up regarding empathy. One is, I completely understand how you feel. Well, first off, remembering emotions, and emotions move us to action. And so if I say to someone, I completely understand, those can conjure up actually more heat than actually calming down. Because, how can you completely understand what I'm going through? Do you have two kids? Do you have that? So that's how that one can really, really trip you up. And we'll look at a couple different ways how these things can be reworded. So first off, so with this first one, so I can't pay my bill. You must be concerned about da da da. Now, here's a key, and I'm going to talk about this again in just a minute because it's so important. Once the customer says something, I can't pay this bill, and you go, oh, you must be concerned about, feeding your kids tonight, or, whatever it might be, depending on the situation, then it's important for me not to stop talking, for me to actually carry that conversation forward, for me to control the conversation. So when you think about these, remember, it's not just me saying what's in blue and stop talking. It's that I continue on. So the next one, it says, my electricity is off. Oh, how frustrating for you. And then I say, I control the conversation, and I start controlling and asking for information I need to help solve that. Do you know how long I've been on hold? Oh my, I'm so sorry for your wait. So that's a little bit more towards them because it's your wait, and just the word so in between the am and sorry really helps with an emphasis on that, And then the last one, I'm upset, I can't get any answers. How frustrating. So those are things that are more about their feelings, Now, let me make sure that I'm really purposeful on, once these empathetic things are said, then what happens next? And this is one of those things that there are so many times when we just kind of stop talking and we lose that momentum that we gained by being empathetic. So always remember that when you acknowledge them and their emotions, you can see all these different emotions, so you're being empathetic. Remember, after you acknowledge, you always take the lead and control the conversation. You move that conversation forward. You start asking questions to help move that conversation forward. So by being empathetic and making sure that you're talking about them and not you, and I'm so sorry to hear that. That's about me. I'm so sorry that XYZ has happened. This must be so frustrating for you. And then I go into taking the lead and asking the questions. So important. Acknowledge and then take the lead. Don't just stop talking. Keep control of the conversation. All right. Oh, we're almost out of our time. And I was just looking to see if we have any questions here. So, all right. So, as always, you can get a hold of us, phone, email, anything. And I want to just kind of close it up with these quotes, and then also I want to see what kind of questions are out there. Never underestimate someone else's pain. Everyone hurts. Some people just hide it better than others. And you never really understand a person until you consider the things from their point of view, until you've really climbed in their skin and walked around. To Kill a Mockingbird, one of those great lines from that story. And I believe empathy is the most essential quality of civilization. So we've got a couple of minutes. Are there any, about 1 minute, any questions about empathy? Any questions about empathy or comments about empathy too? Go ahead and jump in the type and let's see if we've got anything. I see some typings happening. Ah, you're so welcome. And see, that's great. And Stephanie, I love that you recognize that. It comes more naturally for you. So that's where it doesn't for me. And it's fine. Recognize that we're all capable and empathy can be learned. All the research we've ever done says yes, yes, yes. Have your radar turned on for it. All right. Ah, very good. Yes, I'm so glad. Yes, jump in, and her TED Talk is wonderful. Yes, it's absolutely wonderful. All right. Let me just see if there are any other questions that pop up. Ah, so nonverbal empathy. If you're face to face with someone, your facial expressions are wonderful. Absolutely. And then there are also what we call those those verbal head nods. So if you're on the phone, rather than, they can't see you when you're on the phone, you go, oh, that's empathy. But really, really listening and being focused on someone and nodding and just almost leaning into them, but also watch their body language. If they're leaning back, you don't want to lean too far in because that'll make them uncomfortable. And you want connection. You want connection. So yeah, I'm so glad you brought up nonverbal. Oh, body language is huge. So okay, TED Talk. Let me plug another TED Talk. Amy Cuddy and body language. Amy Cuddy. Just pop in body language in TED and at TED.com and she'll pop up. Energy doesn't lie. Yes. Oh yes, and when we're empathetic, it helps feed people with energy. Such a great point, Ronald. Are there certain words to stay away from? Words such as I completely understand, and also making sure when you start saying words like I, make sure that you're saying something that actually about them and not about yourself. So I can be one of those words that is a signal for you, going, oh, all right, am I going to finish the sentence with something about them or is it something about me? So, and the understand, really be careful. Now, with the understand also, if you say something like, I understand you can't pay your bill, well, that's not empathy. That's just restating what they've said. So understand can really, really be tricky. I'm glad you asked. That's good. Yes, Beverly, people don't care what you know until you know until they know how much you care. And I've found that that's actually attributed originally to Teddy Roosevelt, which is fantastic. And so many people say that. I just love it. It's worth repeating over and over again. There have been times when I don't know what to say. You know what? There's an interesting video when you look on Brene Brown. There's a video and she literally talks about the situation where sometimes it's just saying, I'm not exactly sure what to say right now. I'm glad you shared this. Sometimes it's just as simple as that. Remember, it's all about human connection, human to human. Yes, it is all about the heart. Absolutely. All right. And I know that we're a bit over the time. Everyone, thank you oh so much for being with us again today. And happiest of holidays. And we will hopefully see you again soon on our next live webinar. We'll be in touch, everyone. Thank you.